Once the cameras were positioned where the men wanted them, they taped the transmitters to the outside wall. In the darkness, the dark-colored spy devices were undetectable from more than a couple feet away. To enhance this, the guys unscrewed the only outside light close enough to illuminate the area before they came back inside. The receivers were already plugged into the monitors and recording equipment, and we settled back for the show. The theory was that what one camera missed, the other two would certainly catch. It wasn't much of a show, actually. There was no foreplay, no tenderness, and no affection at all. Brian just mounted my S of a wife. I watched her face closely for a moment. I wasn't sure if it was pain or ecstasy causing the wrinkles on her forehead. Damn, I said after watching for a minute or two. That SOB isn't any bigger than me. Hell, his D isn't anywhere near as big, I protested. What the F? It was true. She'd been pleased to discover most of the other wives in the neighborhood were happy with 6 or less inches. Laura figured out from her girlfriends that my size was on the high end of average. She began calling out to me, demanding to be F by my when we made love. We hadn't done any of that lately. I guessed I knew why, but then again, I really didn't. Brian was obviously near the low end of average, and he had to work hard. What the hell was Laura going to this guy for? My pride was partially redeemed a little later happily. I caught Sherry, one of Carl's agents, looking at my crotch a little while later. She glanced up at the TV monitors and shook her head. She smiled. I thought I detected a little speculation in her eyes. We both looked away. She worked for me, and I wasn't about to mess around in my own backyard, as they say. She was cute, though. Maybe she wouldn't always work for me. There was an opening coming up for a bedmate soon. After a while, I left. There was nothing more to see. Brian and Laura would go at it for a time, rest, and do it again. If you're enjoying my content, consider joining my Patreon community. By becoming a patron, you'll get access to full parts of my videos much earlier than everyone else. Plus, you'll be supporting me to create even more awesome content for you. Check out the link in the description to join now. There was no imagination in Brian's F. Laura refused to let him do it in her mouth. It was depressing. Just what did Laura see in this bozo, and why was she throwing away 6 years of marriage to F him? The two adulterers didn't meet for a week, and they were both more than a little upset with the world that kept them apart. It seemed their schedules just weren't meshing very well, for a change, and they didn't know what to do about it. One day, Kathy came to Laura with a proposal that she and Laura go to Las Vegas for the next weekend. The investigating crew had an extensive dossier on Kathy now. They'd found a mountain of information about her. Kathy, it appeared, was an extremely spiteful woman. Friends knew her as bitter and alienated from her parents and siblings by earlier infidelities. In a phone call neither knew was monitored by Carl's crew, Kathy expanded on her earlier suggestion. She wanted Laura to tell me that Kathy had won 2 free tickets to Vegas in a call-in contest on the radio and had invited Laura to go along. It was clear to everyone hearing the tape of the phone call that Kathy was proposing that only she and Laura take a trip to Sin City. Simply put, the purpose was to get as often as possible. She told Laura she'd bought 2 dozen protection and intended to use every one of them. Laura was won over quickly, but she threw a monkey wrench into Kathy's plans by immediately calling Brian and inviting him along. Kathy sounded unhappy to hear Brian would be joining them there when she heard about it in a later phone call. She made no protest, though. I gathered Brian had to pay his own way. He didn't seem to appreciate that much, judging by the snippy nature of his last phone call before departing. I couldn't help but think what a cheap bastard he was. He actually thought Laura should pay for his trip out there so he could F her. Incredible. Pete, my lawyer, told me he was adding Kathy to his list of people to serve with subpoenas. She was well aware, and had been for a long time, that both Laura and Brian were married. By enticing Laura to spend the weekend in Vegas, she was acting as a facilitator in the whole nasty mess. Pete didn't think she had any money he could get out of her. He didn't even think the lawsuit would go very far in the civil courts, but he was going to put the fear of God into her, he said. She would never ever consider helping wreck anyone else's marriage when he was through with her. We discussed whether to stop this thing with just the footage from the motel or wait until the planned Vegas trip. I was inclined to end the intrigue, the lying, and the deceit right now and just initiate divorce proceedings on Laura immediately. Pete thought we should give them a little more rope to hang themselves, as he put it. The trip outside the state, with all the attendant lies and misrepresentations, would seal their fate. The impact would be especially strong if Laura showed a particularly egregious lack of respect for her marriage vows. Lawyers talk funny. What he really wanted was to see her way over the line in word or deed. As it happened, he got both. The investigators were in the same casino hotel where Kathy, Brian, and Laura were staying. They were in one of the two towers while Carl and 5 of his minions were in a room in the other tower where there was a direct line of sight down into the cheating trio's room. It had cost us $500 for the room clerk to assign Laura a room on this side of the building, and one that could easily be viewed from where Carl was. Carl's operative said those 5 bills disappeared off the counter faster than the eye could follow. A few seconds' work on the reservation computer console was all the clerk had to do. He probably thought it was the easiest money he'd ever earned in his life. Only a couple of 100 feet away, Laura's room, the 3 cameras Carl had set up to tape activity in the room across the way were ready. He told me there was a good chance they would have something to record. According to studies he'd seen, people in high-rise buildings instinctively feel their height and apparent distance from other structures give them a high degree of invisibility. That had been borne out in a number of the cases he'd handled, he said. Even if they closed the shades, Carl's boys had a laser-based device that would be able to sense the minute vibrations of the window over there of the sounds made by the trio of partiers over there. We'd only have a recording of their voices, no video, but it would be of high enough quality to be able to prove in court who the speakers were. It was, Carl said, something that had been perfected during the Cold War and used by Russians and Western intelligence agencies to spy on each other. The telephone conversation was also going to be taped, of course. I was to call Laura and make one last attempt on my part to get Laura to renounce her cheating ways and come home to me. From my attorney's point of view, it was only a prepared script, but I was hoping against hope that it might succeed. I could feel hot flushes and freezing chills chasing each other madly about my body. Conflicting emotions chased themselves around my mind in much the same fashion. I didn't know what I was feeling, except that I hurt. I was sick at my stomach, though I hadn't eaten anything the whole day. Carl and his people left me at home, but I had a great view by way of the cameras they'd set up. A detective following them had watched them almost wear out a stewardess on the plane bringing them little bottles of booze. They were 3 sheets to the wind already. Laura, I said into the cell phone. On the webcam, I could see Laura was on her knees and elbows on the bed being effed by Brian standing behind her. Kathy was standing behind Brian and evidently had a finger up his. What? She said sharply into her cell phone. She moved away from Brian and Kathy away when she heard my voice. Laura, I said again, please, honey, don't have us with B, that man. I'd almost slipped and said the guy's name. I'd have to watch it. I wasn't supposed to know his name yet. I couldn't let Laura know her every move was being covertly watched. Come home to me, babe, please, I pleaded. We can work something out. I tried to sound as coaxing as I could possibly be. This was the wording my attorney wanted me to use. It was designed to show Laura's complete unfaithfulness and indifference. Laura, please think of Alyssa, think of what ruining our marriage will do to her. It's amazing how long a man will hold out hope, even when he's seeing something beautiful shattered before his eyes. I loved Laura. I hoped I could see something to give me hope, but there really wasn't any hope. I might love her. I hadn't learned how not to just yet, but I sure didn't like her at all just at this moment. She affirmed that dislike almost immediately. F you. Laura screamed into the phone. I've told you before, you stupid. I am not having it with anyone, and I've had it with your damned suspicions. I could only shake my head at the duplicity. How in the hell could she say that while she stood naked beside the man who had been F her, and would be again when I hung up? I was amazed at the duplicity. She was quiet for a moment. On TV, I could see she had moved closer to her friends and was watching them go down on each other. But I'll tell you this, sweetheart, she said finally in a confiding tone. I just might go pick up some F down on the drag tonight and bring him up to my room tonight. How's that, honey? Would you like that? After all, I'll be doing it just so you can be right for once. How would that be, dear? I was astounded by the vindictiveness in her voice. This was the same woman who only a year ago wanted to be held all night long after a favorite aunt passed away. I knew Laura as a soft, comfortable presence in my bed. the person to whom I could turn with any problem, and a willing lover when our baby was asleep. Laura, I said unsteadily, I don't know what else to say. I don't know why you want to screw around with our lives like this. Think of what you're going to do to Alyssa, for God's sake. Laura cut me off with another shrill scream. You go to hell and take her with you, Laura shouted. She was almost incoherent. It was only because I could see her lips on the monitor screen that I could understand what she was yelling. When I get home, you son of a b, we're gonna have this out. Damn you, and you're going to be lucky if I don't leave your ass. You got that, you? She screeched some more things I couldn't understand, even with the advantage of being able to watch her lips move. She stabbed at the off button and threw the cell phone at the bed. It bounced off and landed somewhere between the bed and the wall. She staggered over to the bed and motioned to Brian to get back in position. Sunday morning, Carl and the crew dismantled the operation, packed up all the equipment, and shipped it home. Exhausted, they got on a plane and slept all the way home. We, literally, had more information in the form of videotape, pictures, phone transcripts, and financial analysis than my attorney could handle. The sheer volume overwhelmed Pete for a time. He'd be filing the divorce proceedings just before noon on Monday. After that, he'd have 6 months, give or take, to go through the massive material before the state would rubber stamp the obvious and give me my divorce. One thing we could use immediately was the vivid video of my wife being effed by a strange man while screaming curses directed at me and our daughter, after assuring me seconds before that she would never do such a thing. That had been obtained by video taping them through an open window. What a naked eye could observe could also be recorded for evidence. To that we added footage from my home surveillance cameras showing a montage of incidents where Laura could be heard and seen doing something to show indifference to Alyssa's welfare. One example of that was the scene at the door the night Laura went out, and Alyssa came running down the stairs to catch her. Other snippets showed Laura being short with the child for no reason, and one showed her telling Alyssa she could get her own breakfast because she, Laura, didn't have time. All of that was bundled together and put before a judge early Monday morning. She was moved to grant a temporary restraining order granting me full custodial privileges pending action by the family court system. Another one granted our request to keep Laura away from the child until a family court judge had time to review the case. There were several other motions that were granted almost without question. It's wonderful what a wealthy and influential man can get done in a short period. Actually, I was helping that man, my attorney, become even wealthier. Monday morning was never a good time in the accounting firm. There were more than a few hard drinkers among the staff, and of those, some had begun partying Friday night and hadn't quit until Sunday evening. Most of the other personnel dawdled at their desks or visited with others around the coffee machine until the drinkers got themselves in hand. When the big man dressed in a gray suit came in from the common area hallway just after the lunch hour, a few hopeful women marked his progress down the aisles, but he seemed to have no interest. He kept glancing at a photograph in his right hand while looking every woman directly in the face. After a few moments' search, he found the woman he was looking for. He planted himself in front of her as she spoke quietly to a tall, distinguished-looking man in his early 40s and a shorter, slighter man who was clinging close to the woman. She wasn't very happy about that and kept trying to slide away from him. Her eyes were dark and troubled. She was forcing herself to pay attention to what her supervisor was saying. "Laura Archer?" the big man asked in a deep, rumbling voice. He'd come up behind the three without them noticing. The woman turned and nodded. She was not happy today. Something was haunting her, and it showed on her face. She watched as the man took a thick envelope from his inside coat pocket. "You, madam," he said in a booming voice, "are served." He paused for effect, making sure he had everyone's attention. He set his briefcase down on a convenient desk and began taking out legal documents printed on onion skin and backed with a thicker baby blue sheet of paper. "This," he told a stunned Laura, "is a copy of the petition for divorce filed this morning. It is Mr. Mark Archer's intent to divorce you at the earliest possible moment." He handed her another set of papers. "This, madam, is an order from the court that you not come within 1,000 feet of the residence formerly occupied by you and Mr. Archer." He dropped another set of documents into her hands. "This is a temporary restraining order forbidding you to contact Mr. Archer's daughter, one Alyssa Rio Archer, for any reason. You may not place a phone call, Send an email, a letter, or any other manner attempt to speak to Miss Archer. Is that clear, madam? He asked. Laura nodded numbly. She didn't know what else to do. The look of horror on her face was plain to everyone. By now, a large crowd was gathering and coming nearer. Mr. Archer, the big man continued, wishes that you be informed all of your joint account credit cards were canceled 2 hours ago. Your joint checking and savings accounts you held with your former husband have also been closed. This represents 50% of the total amount in the former joint accounts. He disdainfully held up a cashier's check by one corner, as if it were contaminated with some nasty substance, before adding it to the stack of paperwork in Laura Archer's hands. Mr. Archer further wishes me to inform you that all of your clothing and personal possessions are being packed at this moment and will be loaded into a truck now arriving at your former residence. All of your personal goods will be placed in storage and will be made available to you whenever and wherever you desire. You may communicate your wishes to Mr. Archer's attorney at the number shown on this card. You will not be allowed inside the residence you formerly shared with Mr. Archer for any reason, and he wishes me to advise you the locks have all been replaced and the security codes changed in the residence's security system. The big man looked down at the now crying woman with no sign of pity. He looked around, spying the slender man trying to slip away without notice. M.R. Collier, he boomed, "Don't be in such a hurry." Taking another envelope from his briefcase, he slapped it into Brian Collier's unwilling palm. "You, sir, are served," remarked the big man. "Congratulations," he said. "You are named as a correspondent in the matter of Archer versus Archer and—" He took another mass of stapled papers from the briefcase. "You also are the respondent in a civil case filed this morning by Mr. Archer for willfully and maliciously interfering in the marriage between Mark Archer and Laura Archer, in that you have been carrying on a slimy, ugly, sordid little affair with the former Mrs. Archer." Brian looked like he was about to faint and had to hold on to a desk to keep from falling. My attorney didn't think this. The big man looked around. Seeing Laura's supervisor, he made his way to him to serve him with notice of a suit, also filed this morning, demanding reimbursement to Mark Archer for failing to enforce the company's morality clauses with all the contracts for mid-level and above employees. A senior vice president, aware of the problem from the start, was also served in the executive offices. Watching from the back of the room, I felt almost nothing. I was cold, my face frozen into harsh, unforgiving planes. I stood silently near the doors through which the process server had entered. I'd paid him a healthy extra fee to give my wife the check and other stuff. It wasn't his job, strictly speaking. I saw a dawning realization of how thoroughly she'd screwed herself spread across Laura's pretty face. When she collapsed on the floor, I turned and left through the big double-wide doors.